Hey, what's up guys? This is Java Puppy. In this video, I would like to go over an actual piece of code, yay, to, to solidify everything that we covered such as ADT, collection class, and arrays. So I decided to make a class called BagOfCharacters. This is going to be an example of an ADT, and more specifically a collection class that uses an array. So hopefully after this video, our understanding of what we learned so far becomes more concrete. Feel free to copy what I have or create something better. I'm going to be using this class for a personal project I have in mind. I just want to say, once you have knowledge on how to code, it really is up to you and your imagination to make something cool with your skills. Don't tell yourself that you can't do it because you don't know enough. Because chances are that's not true, especially if you're watching this video. Anyways, but before I go over the code with you, you probably already noticed that I have a whole lot of comments in this piece of code. This is something that I'm not used to myself, and it is easy to neglect the importance of proper documentation, but it is extremely important to have some system that we follow when it comes to commenting. It will not only help us when we come back to it months later when we completely forgot about how this works, but also it helps when other people are trying to use our class. Because programming is almost never a self project. There's always gonna be a team of programmers trying to build something together. Also, this kind of comes back to the principle of information hiding. We don't want people using our class to worry about how it was implemented. Instead, we just want them to know what the code does just by looking at the comments, trusting that we did our job. Okay, that was a bit of a rant. Let's now step through what I have here. I won't be able to go through all the methods in this one video. I'll have to divide it into two, and let's get started. First of all, this class is called BagOfCharacters. Its objects are going to contain a set of characters, and I wrote some limitations of the class at the top. Um, this particular class resembles string class. Um, it's not going to be as extensive as string class, and it's going to be a little bit different, but we'll, we'll find out soon enough. These limitations should be very intuitive, so I'm not going to spend so much time, but let's go over them quickly. So the first is that the capacity of the bag is limited to the largest integer. If we think about it for a second, it makes perfect sense because we're using an array, and when we initialize the size of an array, we use an integer. Next is that the bag can only contain characters within the English alphabet. So this means that we don't want any special characters in the character bag, we just want letters. And this is just a decision for the design of this class. Then we have only one import statement, which I'm not going to talk about just now. We need to import arrays for one little thing. By the way, we don't need to import arrays to use arrays. So finally we have our class, BagOfCharacters. Let's glance over the whole code first, and we will dive into the details. At the top, I have static final variables, then member variables, then I have constructors, and then methods. Some of the methods I implemented in this class are going to be unique to this specific class, but some of them are quite generic and common to all collection classes. All the methods will have something to do with manipulating the data. First method we have is add, then we have add all from, add many, then we have clone method, remove to remove character in the bag, trim to size, union, stretch, which is to increase the capacity of the bag, get empty, index, then some getters, toString method, then we have a couple static methods I created to make my life easier. So now let's go back to the very top. The only static final variable I have is the predetermined capacity of the bag, which we're going to use for our default constructor. In the comments I said that this value cannot be negative. We don't want negative values ever for array capacity. Then we have only two member variables. The first, count, is going to keep track of the number of characters in the bag. The next is character array called bag. this is going to contain all the characters for the bag. Now we have our default constructor. In the comments, I have a brief explanation of what this does, and then if any, some preconditions, postconditions, and potential exceptions. In this constructor, we're going to try to give the member variables initial values. The count is going to be set to 0 since there should be no characters in the bag when it is first created. Then we specify the capacity of the bag with the predetermined value. Notice that I used this.count and this.bag. I personally think that using this makes the code more readable. It helps to distinguish which variable we're talking about because sometimes we deal with multiple objects of the same type in one method. By using this, we know that we're referring to the caller object. And I have this whole thing in try and catch block. If there happens to be no available memory for these two variables, then we'll throw an exception called out of memory error. Note that this error will come up again and again in this class and in collection classes in general. It may seem unnecessary to have this because nowadays we have so much memory, but in this series we want to be especially aware of the space and time we're using for maximum efficiency. For a small program, yes, this may not be necessary, but when designing a general collection class that is potentially going to deal with a large amount of data, we should at least be aware of the potential problems, even at design phase. Here, instead of saying e.print stack trace to print auto-generated message, I added my own little message. Also, it is important to point out that we want to catch specific exceptions instead of a general exception. This not only helps us to respond differently to different exceptions, but it also helps immensely with debugging because we know exactly what is going wrong instead of your program just crashing with red text in the console. The only exception that I didn't worry about here is null pointer exception. The way I designed this class, this particular exception should never be thrown. It should be taken care of by Java itself, so I don't have to worry about this one. Then we have another constructor where we will pass an initial capacity from the user. This is essentially the same as the default constructor, but it is different in that first, we will check to make sure that the user is not passing a negative value for an initial capacity of the bag. Like I mentioned previously, we don't want negative values as capacity for arrays. So if it is not greater than 0, then we will throw an illegal argument exception. Only when the user passes a valid argument, we will try to set the initial values. Again, try and catch block in case there is no memory. Then we set the values of this object. Pretty simple and straightforward here. Then we have our add method. Whenever we want to add a character into the bag, we want to be able to call this method add and pass the character we want through this method. We don't want the user of this class to access member variables directly because of what we discussed on information hiding. So what we want to do is when we receive a character to be added, some things to point out are first, we cannot add a character to an already full bag because it will overflow. Second, like we mentioned previously, the character that is passed by the user must be an English letter. Third, the capacity of the bag must be specified, otherwise we can't call this method. Also, we want to put this character in the first empty spot of the array, not just anywhere. So we need to be able to find where the empty index is, if any. First thing we have set up is to check if the character is indeed an English character. If it is not, we will throw an illegal argument exception. If it is all good, we will find where the empty index is, set the specified character at the index, then we will increment the count since we added a character. I created a separate method to do this, and I will go over how I did it in detail when we get to this method. And anyways, if the array is full, getEmptyIndex would return -1, which will throw arrayIndex out of bounds exception. Also here we don't need to worry about memory space because when the array was specified, the program allocated memory space already for the capacity of the array. Next method is add all from method. We want to be able to add all the characters in one bag to another bag. So for this method, we want to make sure that these two bags are not null. And one thing that could go wrong is when I try to add all the characters from bag 2 to bag 1 could overflow. So in the code, I'm going to pass the bag that has characters I want to add. We will put this in try and catch in case bag 1 overflows. So the for loop looks complicated, but all it is that I want to loop through the entire array of bag 2 if there is a character, or in other words, the element is not 0, then add that specific element from bag 2 to bag 1. Also, I used the add method I created earlier because I didn't want to type the same thing. One thing I need to be careful of when I do this is if I change something in add method, I could break this method. Next, we have add many. Here, what we want to do is if the user wants to add multiple characters, we want them to be able to pass those characters in one method call instead of having to call the add method multiple times. The syntax for this is ... after the type. And this basically is passed on as an array of characters. For this method, the same preconditions apply. Like the characters need to be from the alphabet, and also the bag cannot be null or full. And in the try, we have a different type of for loop. It's called for each loop. This loop syntax is very useful in this case. It just means that from character array, I want to loop through every character, and for every iteration, we just add the character that we're at. We could use the traditional for loop to do the same thing, but this works too and could be more intuitive for some to read. Next method is clone. This is a common method for all collection classes. I didn't do it here, but I can make this class implement an interface called clonable since I'm using this method here. But what this will do is return an exact clone of the color object that is completely new. I need to point out that when we are dealing with objects, because they are reference types, we can't just assign them to each other. We need methods like clone. The only problem we could have is that we might not have enough memory for this clone object. If so, we will throw out of memory error. In the body, what we do is create a clone object with the capacity that is the same as the color object. Then in the for loop, I want to iterate as many times as the capacity and add the same characters from the calling bag object. Then, when we finish copying the characters into the clone bag, we return the clone bag. Now, we'll try to go over the rest of the methods in the next video. Hopefully the implementation of this class makes some sense. If you don't understand something, please leave a comment. If you have a better way to implement some of these methods, please let me know. And if you learned something from this video, please leave a like and subscribe for more. Thanks.